Aiboan, Vanakkam, Assalamu alaikum, and a very good evening. Greetings from AmCham, Sri Lanka. Today, on the third episode of our Be Inspired series, created and curated to provide you with learning, leadership, and strategic inspiration during these challenging times, we're privileged to present a discussion showcasing the resilience, the performance, and impact of the apparel sector in Sri Lanka, despite and through the challenges of the ongoing pandemic resultant business and economic environment. During this discussion that will be moderated by AmCham Sri Lanka President and Trade and Investment Evangelist Prasanta Jayamaha, we will establish and explore the influence and effect of the apparel sector on the Sri Lankan economy, discuss the performance of the sector and the strategies and lessons learned over the last 2 years, and also discuss briefly the current and emerging opportunities for the sector in the context of its impact on the stability of the Sri Lankan economy. In case you're not aware, the apparel sector accounts for 32% of the country's exports, with over 350,000 direct employed and a further 700,000 indirectly through the supporting infrastructure. It is largely a female-based industry, with these ladies accounting for 78% of the industry workforce. Now, our panel today needs very little detail in introduction. 4 of the largest apparel exporters that collectively employ over a third of the apparel industry workforce and account for around 40% of apparel exports. They currently serve on the executive committees of the industry bodies, with 3 of them as office bearers on the Sri Lanka Association of Apparel Exporters. Arun Hydramani, Director of the Hydramani Group, Shirendra Lawrence, Executive Director of MAS Holdings, Hasi Boma, Executive Director of Moose Clothing under the Brandix Group, and Jivit Senaratna, Senior Manager Business Analysis at the Star Garments Group. Gentlemen, welcome to the AmCham Sri Lanka platform. It's our pleasure to host you this evening. Now, before I hand over to our moderator, a quick reminder that we will be taking limited audience questions in the last half hour of the session. So do post your questions in the Q&A box, or if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, you can post it on the comments box and we'll take it up. We will share it with our panelists. Mr. Jayamaha, over to you.
Thank you, Rai. Good evening and welcome to the audience and the distinguished panelists for this evening's Be Inspired series. As Rai mentioned, our topic in focus today is indeed an inspiring one. The apparel sector is Sri Lanka's golden child of export. From small beginnings in the 1970s, rapid evolution in the 1990s, and now Sri Lanka's largest export product from Sri Lanka. We are privileged to have 4 leaders from the leading apparel companies on this panel today. The COVID pandemic turned our lives and livelihoods upside down. In an instant, there was disruptions to mobility, from free moment to absolute lockdowns. Workplaces, from offices to work from home, factory floors totally disrupted, airports and ports closed. The list is extensive. Whilst most just wanted to survive, these businesses focused on making use of the opportunities. Learning from them and what made this possible is what makes this meeting today very exciting for me and hopefully you. We are here to speak to 4 apparel industry leaders representing the Sri Lanka Apparel Exporters Association. We intend to discuss and unpack how this industry not only survived, but managed to pivot and grow during this period. Pandemic resilient companies is what encapsulates the human spirit of perseverance. So this evening, let's hear from them, let's learn from them, and let's be inspired. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this evening. As we move to our first round of questions, I would like to discuss with each panelist the apparel industry as a whole and the impact that the pandemic has had on it. Let's start with you, Arun. Arun, would you mind giving the audience a brief overview of the influence and size of the apparel sector on the Sri Lankan economy, please?
Hi, Prashanta. Sure. And first of all, thank you to you and the AmCham board and team for having us on board this evening. I've been in this in the apparel industry for over 18 years now, but it's really been over the past few years through my involvement with the Sri Lankan Apparel Export Association and also our apex body JAF, the Joint Apparel Association Forum, that I've realized the extent that our industry, the extent of the impact that our industry has on our economy. I think, as was mentioned earlier, there are a number of factors. There are first some tangible factors. We are 6% of the country's GDP. We consistently rank around 40% of our exports of the country. And coming out of the pandemic, where a lot of industries have been very negatively affected, we've been fortunate that we've been able to revive the industry relatively rapidly. And we're on track this year. We're hoping to achieve $5 billion of exports even this year, and hoping to grow on this base from 22 onwards. We've also mentioned that our industry is a major employer within the manufacturing sector. We're the largest employers, 350,000 direct employees, and over 700,000 indirects. And our sector is not just the apparel manufacturing. There are many other sectors involved. We have a dynamic raw materials sector which is growing, including fabrics, accessories, etc. We also have a strong association with the logistics sector, and that is becoming extremely important with all of the disruptions in supply chains. Our collaboration with the logistics sector is very important. And also innovation. There's a lot of innovation both within our member companies and also for the industry as a whole, and we need to continue that. And aside from these tangible figures, Prashanta, there's also a lot of intangibles. One thing that I've realized, for our industry is there's been a history of collaboration. You'll see on this panel, a lot of us, our companies, we compete for the same customers. And we're all independent companies, but we have a lot of collaboration as an industry, and I think that example has been set over a number of years. And it's not only collaboration among companies, member companies, but we collaborate with other trade associations, with government bodies as well. And I think this is a good example for other industries. This has allowed us to really make the Sri Lankan industry where we punch above our weight on a global scale. So I think it's been documented that a number of brands, and retailers, they rely on Sri Lanka. We're known as an ethical and reliable manufacturer. We're leading when it comes to sustainability and innovation. And a lot of brands come to us, when they want to pilot a new project, when they want to set an example for some of their other vendors in other parts of the world, they come to Sri Lanka. So I think these are things that we should be proud of. There's a lot of hard work that we have to build on, but I think our foundation is strong, and hopefully we can build on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Arun. Mind-boggling stats: $5 billion, 40+% of the exports, and being the ethical sourcing destination and being branded. It sounds very exciting and well done. Congratulations to everyone on this panel to be part of that industry. Shrendra, over to you. The COVID pandemic has had a wide range of effects on all businesses and industries. As such, could you share a summary of the impact of the pandemic on the performance of the apparel sector in Sri Lanka over the last 2 years, please?
Hi, good evening, Prashanta. Thanks. Thank you for having me on the program as well. And yeah, sure. Thanks, Arun, for that intro as well on in the industry. And I'll sort of try and pick up on that, on what's been going on in the industry over the last 18 to 20 months. So I think the first impact of COVID-19 actually on our industry, the Sri Lankan apparel industry, was even before it hit us directly. It was because of the interruption of our supply chains very early in 2020. And this was as a result of the pandemic affecting China, which plays a huge part in the supply chain of our apparel industry. And that happened at the end of 2019, and the impact came across to us very, very early in the year 2020, as our eastern supply chains were impacted in the run-up. And this was also compounded by, this was the run-up to the Chinese New Year, which was in January. And traditionally, the industry has had to stock up materials at that time because China grinds to a standstill for about a month. So this meant that we were already into the challenging process of constant replanning of production and trying to balance customer expectations with supply chain interruptions due to the Chinese situation, even before we actually saw the pandemic ourselves. So when it hit us directly in March, as we'll all recall, it resulted in a nationwide knockdown mid-month, and this in turn led to unprecedented disruption, with commercial manufacturing being completely shut down till May. Even though the curfews and so on weren't fully lifted at that time, there were some limited operations that started up. In the interim, there were, of course, some special approvals given to the industry to manufacture PPE for the local health sector from around mid-April. But at the same time, since our ultimate markets were also impacted, there was an appreciation of the issue by our customers. And in a sense, this helped ease the pressure. But then there were also requests for order cancellations, pushbacks, and so on, leaving us with some serious challenges as we work in a make-to-order environment where products are developed each season based on new designs, and raw materials then are only ordered at that point, very much against confirmed orders. So these cancellations left many in the sector with materials that they couldn't use, and also having to negotiate with material suppliers on liabilities for orders placed but not delivered, and likewise. And then on top of that, many of the customers requested immediate discounts. I think the word at the time was to share the pain. And for us, this was something that we didn't prefer, but it was a lesser of two evils. So we had no option but to accept them. So it put some financial challenges on our industry as well. In some cases, these sort of requests were even applied retrospectively for orders recently delivered. So it left us with lots of challenges. But having said all of this, on the positive side, the industry in Sri Lanka has been built mostly on strategic customer relationships rather than transactional order placement. So this meant that discussions on solutions to the issues were to some extent consultative, and there were some compromises on both sides, which made the burdens just a little bit easier. The result of all of this was that despite the value of apparel exports declining nearly 50% in that second quarter of 2020, as against the same period in 2019, this recovered partially to a decline of around 20% by the fourth quarter. And we ended up the year at about just over 4 billion, about 4.1 billion US versus 5.3 billion in the year before. So a net decline for the year was something in the region of about 22%, perhaps a lot less than we would have expected, when we were sitting and looking at the situation at the end of, as we came out of the lockdowns in May, June. Moving to 2021, more bringing you right up to date, the challenges both with the pandemic and also in our interactions with our customers have been a little bit different. In terms of the situation on the ground in Sri Lanka, the impact of the second wave at the end of 2020 and the third wave that followed post Aurudu this year has been, I would say, more unpredictable, and we really have had to learn to operate in what now seems to become the new norm. One thing I must mention is that the industry has always come together and worked collectively in times of adversity like these, and there has been a huge amount of sharing of best practices, and this has helped companies who would have otherwise have struggled to keep at as best as possible to their customer commitments, whilst at the same time obviously focusing on the safer working environments, which has been critical. Most of the internal processes and procedures have had to be written through this time, from physically altering the entire production flows to catering to social distancing mandates, to establishing secure bubbles, health checks, and establishing remote working wherever possible. So the magnitude of the change has been significant. This has meant that discipline of adhering to these protocols have also had to be established, monitoring systems put in place, and this has meant a significant change of behavior. Having to do all of this without the vaccination process in place for our factories, factory-based associates till at least 3 or 4 months ago has been additionally challenging. But the biggest issue at the end of the day is managing customer expectations, because unlike in 2020, their markets have to a greater extent bounced back, and they need and expect us to satisfy their consumers' demands. And these two have changed, because the consumer demand has changed over this time. At the same time, we know that we have to continue to compete against regional and global competitors if we are to retain the relationships that we've really worked very hard to establish over the last 20 to 30 years. And some of those competitors that we're up against may not be facing the same issues as we are at the same time. So it's meant the playing field hasn't always been level. But nevertheless, we've ended up in a decent place, as Arun was just mentioning. Currently, most businesses are operating at 80 to 90% of their 2019 capacities. And if the year-to-date performance continues till the remainder of the year, we should end up maybe just a little bit short of the 5 billion that we're hoping, 4.7, 4.8 billion, which would still be an improvement of about 13% on last year, and leave us maybe just about 10% short of the 5.3 billion in 2019. So all in all, I think it's been a tough journey, but we've been hanging in there, and credit to everybody for making that happen.
Credit, certainly, Surendra. It's always nice to hear positive news in this environment. So anytime the word growth is being discussed here, in this, especially as you mentioned, the very prohibitive and difficult environment to have sustainable production. So yeah, it's good to hear that. And I'm just carrying on that same theme to you, Jeevit. It's encouraging to hear this. The last month's export data for the month of July says that there has been a 9% growth month on month for apparel. So as such, do you see a sustainable and longer term growth and demand to keep coming from Western economies as they return to normality?
Yeah. Good evening, Prashant, and thank you for the opportunity as well. And based on your question, yes, there has been a 9% growth when we look at June of this year versus July of this year. But I think we need to take this with a little bit of a grain of salt, because in apparel, at least, we're looking at fashion products that we're shipping. And the month really matters as well. So I think a better metric for us might be looking back at 2020 July and seeing where we are now. If you actually look against 2020 July, our exports are down about 3%, right? And then a second metric I'd like to look at is also the year-to-date performance. Now here, if you take up to July 2021 versus 2020, we've actually outperformed last year by around 21% at this point. But again, a little caveat, we were locked down for 2.5 months of 2020. So this number really does have to take that into consideration. The real benchmark we set ourselves as an industry is 2019, where we achieved $5.3 billion in a year. And if you take that year, if you take the exports up to July, we are around 10% shy of that number. Now, I don't mean to spread doom and gloom by any means. That I'm just giving the context behind this, behind our recovery, so to say. But like Shirendra was saying, there is hope out there. There is a positive out there, which is our customer markets are now open. Demand itself has rushed back, as we've seen. And right now, our biggest challenge is how do we service that demand? How do we keep to our reputation as a manufacturer who keeps to its commitments, which is becoming increasingly challenging with the latest wave of COVID in the country as well. So like Shirendra was saying, we are operating around 10 to 15% below capacity because of COVID disruptions that keep coming up on a regular basis. But if we can navigate that storm, I do think we can get back to what we were. It's about how we control this surge at that point. And if we control this surge of cases now, we can get back to what we were. It's a matter of when and not if. And I do think there is a pathway to that long-term sustainable growth that you were talking about.
Thanks, David. So in summary, you believe that there will be more long-term sustainable growth, and this is not just a pent-up demand or some immediate driver. Fantastic.
Exactly.
Good news for the country and good news for the industry. Over to you, Hasib. Getting onto the topic of COVID-19 and especially vaccinations, JAF has stated that vaccinating the entire workforce is a key part of its plan to keep the apparel industry operating. What's the progress so far, and what has been the impact of the vaccination drive?
Yeah, thanks, Prashanta, for having me as well. Just a quick correction on that. Actually, it has not been the JAF that has really been vaccinating the workforce. It has been the Ministry of Health and the government which has been doing the vaccination itself. But very interestingly, where JAF got involved very early on was it went to the authorities and the government to insist on getting people above 18 vaccinated as well. And that was done, and that allowed us to currently get to first jab. It has been about 90% inoculation within the industry, And the second dose, 70% of the workforce within the industry have taken the second dose as well. So these are very good number. I mean, these are very good numbers, and so we thank the government for making this happen. Then just staying on that, but say the industry still is maintaining all the what do you call the social distancing, the screening, and the PCR tests, all the health guidelines which were put in place, because vaccination itself doesn't solve the issue, but we have come a long way. So 70% of the industry workforce has got the second vaccination.
Fantastic. So fantastic. 70% has got the second dose. That's a great stat, especially since you're the largest employer. So and that's encouraging news. So my gut says that by the next 2 to 3 months, the industry should be well insulated from another wave, possibly.
Like I said, that's a very even though vaccination has taken place, but what we've still realized is COVID infections can still take place. It's not at the same level of this. The infection is not as bad. So, like I said earlier, hence the apparel industry is still maintaining the social distancing and the health guidelines which are put in place. So say, for example, even random PCR testing is still being conducted to maintain the whole, even though the vaccination has taken place. So we hope we can prevent another wave taking place.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Hasib. Moving to our next round of questions, and Shurendra touched on this briefly, but hearing from buyers such as Victoria's Secret or Nike and others, it's clear that the apparel companies in Sri Lanka focus on strong strategic partnerships with their customers and also the supply chain. I want to ask a few questions on how this has impacted your own business's performance, especially during the pandemic. Arun, I'll bring that to you. Perhaps you could share with us how meaningful these partnerships have been and how they've helped Hydromoney Group.
Sure. Thanks, Prashanta. Yeah, I think especially since March of 2020, the word partnership has been extremely important. I think one of the values for us as a company, one of the values we have is stronger together. And what we mean by that is that we can't run our company without partnership and trust among our employees, our customers, our suppliers. So these are really important, and these were really tested as of March last year. I think the first thing that would have happened is the uncertainty. So overnight, all of us had millions of dollars of orders that were cancelled, and we had the raw material for these orders, but the customers, a lot of our customers are publicly traded companies. They could not have that inventory on their order books, so they had to cancel huge orders overnight. So getting around that and partnering with our banks, customers, and suppliers was a tireless effort that a lot of our teams had to work on, and I know a lot of other members of our industry had to work on, and that did take some time. And there were some customers and suppliers who probably didn't behave in the spirit of partnership, but I think the majority did. And I think for us as a company, we've also streamlined the number of customers that we work with, and also the number of suppliers. And I think it really helped us to strategize how we can move forward with these partnerships. Also with our workforce, there's a lot of uncertainty, and before large scale vaccination that Hasib mentioned, there was a lot of uncertainty in terms of how safe we could operate. So there was partnerships in terms of our workforce taking risks. Some of us had to travel overseas, etc. And then that was another partnership that luckily we had the trust among us that we could operate. And I think now as we move forward, our industry, there are a lot of keywords are fast fashion and just in time. But if you look at the reality in the global supply chain, not just in the apparel industry, is that there are shortages, there's a lack of inventory, etc., throughout in each area for various reasons. So now we're going to customers and and asking them, saying that, you need to tell us 6 months, you need to project out what are your raw material purchases that you need and capacity you need for at least 6 months. We're asking suppliers in volatile conditions, where raw material prices are changing, we're asking them to try and maintain prices for 6 months. And this is very challenging, and it requires a new level of partnership. So this is very top of mind, Prashanta. I'm sure our other panelists have some ideas, but we're relying on these close bonds among all areas of our supply chain to get us through this very challenging time.
Thanks, Arun. That's a very interesting concept in terms of the entire ecosystem of the supply chain gets through the pandemic together. And life is always easier when you look in hindsight and say, oh, we got through it. But I'm sure in March 2020, when you had millions of dollars of orders getting canceled and inventory, life wouldn't have been that easy. But it's exciting to get to the other side, and you still have the right suppliers, you have customers, and the business is functioning. And like you said, it's 10% from being its the industry is 10% away from its best year. So that's true partnership. So good to know that. Jeevit, I'm moving on to you in terms of also some customer expectations, especially in these years. Customers now expect their suppliers to be aligned to the standards, especially with ESG or environmental, social, and governance standards and criteria. In the industry, in the apparel industry, we hear terms such as design support, sustainability playing an important role in customer partnerships. Could you help elaborate on how this is your industry has leveraged on making this a competitive advantage during this challenging time?
Of course, Prashanta. So I think I'll take that question in two parts. First, let me focus on design and support services. Now, the interesting thing to me with the pandemic is how need accelerated the adoption of technology that existed but was underutilized at the time. And I think a prime example of this is 3D product development technology, right? Now, why I say this is if you look at the apparel life cycle, before we even head into bulk production, we have several iterative rounds of sample making. This happens where we make physical samples, send them for comments, redo the samples, etc. Now, 3D brought in the potential to change this game because suddenly we were able to produce samples virtually, get comments in near real time, and execute them without having to actually produce a physical sample itself. But initial adoption of this technology pre-pandemic was pretty low. One of the main reasons was because people were hesitant on whether it would accurately represent a physical sample or not. Now, when the pandemic hit, the game changed altogether. Suddenly, factories were closed, sample rooms were closed. We were not able to actually execute sample making and product development like we used to. But because we had ventured into ventures like 3D before the pandemic, companies like Star, like those we have on this panel as well, were able to pivot into product development at home. We were able to develop samples at home virtually through 3D and get approval, get comments to at least let the business sustain at this time and make sure there was outlook looking into the future. So the explosion, if you take it from Star's perspective, we went from 15% of our business using 3D to close to 50% of our business now using 3D since the pandemic began. And also, our capacity has exploded to over 600 virtual renderings a month at this point, which is one of the largest in the country at this point. And now I think companies are starting to look at the next step. The next step is how do we bring a 3D virtual showroom? Because customers may not be able to visit showrooms. They're unable to come to Sri Lanka to see what we have to offer. So how do we make a 3D product showroom? And that is a venture we're engaging on. So what this example to me highlights is how we were able to pivot and survive through the pandemic because we had embraced technology and we were providing a design solution that wasn't embraced before the pandemic, but we thought would actually be capitalized on at some point in the future. Now, the second part of your question related to sustainability, ESG, and those values as well. So I'll start off by a little bit about Sri Lanka's industry, and I'll explain why. I'm not here to rattle off the industry's accomplishments by any means, but more to set the context for my answer. If you take Sri Lanka, we have always been a leader in ethical manufacturing because we go above and beyond what a country's labor law requires, for an example. And even on the sustainability front, we've always been world leaders in apparel manufacturing. So we have companies that are engaged in ocean plastic recycling into garments. We have companies that were the first apparel factories to be net zero carbon emitters. Then if you take my personal context with Star, we were the first in the world to have all our factories certified as carbon neutral. And then we have South Asia's first passive house in Sri Lanka. We have around 20 buildings in this country, apparel factories that are certified as LEED across the industry as a whole in Sri Lanka, and so on and so forth. Now, what this brings about, what these accomplishments bring about, is a trust with our partners, because they start trusting us to do the right thing at each step of the process. They trust Sri Lankan manufacturers to produce apparel the right way. And all these achievements I spoke about have led to the partnerships Arun was speaking about becoming strong over time because of the reputation they brought about. And that is another element that we capitalized on throughout the pandemic as well, in terms of managing our customers, in terms of being able to achieve some kind of compromise when it came to cancellations, when it came to liabilities. How do we meet the middle ground? And those came, I think, from Sri Lanka's ability to, one, provide solutions others couldn't, two, its reputation of doing the right thing throughout, and is expecting reciprocity, which we did get, Prashant. I hope that answered your question.
Certainly did, Jivit. And it's inspiring more than anything to answer your question, to understand the sustainability side and obviously the effect it has on branding the industry and obviously the country per se in the eyes of the customers. So yeah, fantastic. So moving on to our next question round, I want to start with Hasib. We want to better understand how businesses navigated through COVID-19 and the related crisis. So as such, Hasib, Brandic's efforts to reassign development and production capabilities to PPE or personal protective clothing has been spoken of about a number of occasions. I believe it helped Brandix with the early part of the pandemic. Perhaps you could share with us some of the strategies you all have implemented to be successful in that space and the learnings from this, please.
Absolutely. So say, like Shirendra said earlier, when we came to March 2020, there was absolute chaos. So there was order cancellations. So we had heaps of open capacity. There was absolute chaos. We were very uncertain of what was going to happen. And so in the case of Brandix, say luckily we're vertically integrated. So we have stake in 3 fabric mills, and that's sort of what we went about doing. There was, we sort of converted the fabric which was being used for sort of Victoria's Secrets and all that to convert it for PPE and masks. So that was the initial thing. Then say marketing teams went out absolutely canvassing, looking for, because this sort of product was very new to us. We were not really doing it, so we didn't have customer bases and all that. So marketing teams went hard out. They worked overtime on securing orders for, say, PPE and face masks, such products. So then the other part, when we got to it, what we realized was compliance. So say our factories were really not compliant to make medical products. So say the compliance teams within Brandix had to work overtime to get the factories ready to do a PPE and say these medical grade products. So interestingly, during that time period, we also managed to get the FDA approval to export surgical masks to the US. Then finally, what we realized is at the factories, the machineries were not really aligned to make the PPE and what was that, say the face masks again. So immediately we had to say the engineering teams got involved. They started retinkering with the machines to make them capable of doing these products. And also we had to make, say what we did was we made some calls in March 2020 itself. We decided to invest in automated machinery for making face masks. So that was brought to Sri Lanka in April 2020 itself. And we got about doing that. So the result of all these different teams, everyone putting, being agile and reacting to the situation, reacting to the crisis, was as Brandix, we were able to export over 250 million face masks to the United States. And then our sister company, InCube, what they managed to do was they did the whole the PPE, medical grade PPE gowns, which were exported to a reputed healthcare provider to the United Kingdom. So that's sort of said that's was our story on how we sort of overcame the situation, the pandemic.
And that's very inspiring in the way, Hasib. This is again, in hindsight, it seems like, oh well, we just started making medical garments or PPE, but like you said, the entire industry, the business, the company had to pivot into to have the machinery, the certification, the engineering team, the marketing team. So there's a lot that had to happen to make this, possible. And that is what we like to talk about with resilience. And that separates being resilient. So thank you for sharing that, Hasib.
Thank you.
Shrendra, I'm moving on to you. We discuss speech, agility, flexibility. It's something that we speak about, and especially during pandemics, that's very important. Could you share with us the changes that had to be made in the way that MAS runs its businesses, and perhaps starting with the adoption of working from home environment, and any takeaways that are now part of the ongoing sustainable growth plans of the company?
Sure, Prasanta. Thank you. Yeah. Well, the first wave was hugely challenging because it happened so fast. It thrust us into a work from home environment, which we were essentially unprepared for. Fortunately, we, like a lot of companies, perhaps over the last 2 or 3 years, had piloted some sort of remote working flexi hours policy, which meant that we had in place some general guidelines. We understood the different communication platforms available, and we have much of the infrastructure in place for people to work from home. So there was some of that done beforehand, but it was by and large unexpected. We certainly had not expected for this to have to transition to a full-time work from home effort. And as the first wave extended from 1 week to the next, and then from 1 month to the next week, we started to realize huge gaps in personal connectivity. And this extended to a void in wider team engagement across departments and individuals, as people now really only connected with those that they had to do with directly during the course of their routine day-to-day business. So we had to take a number of actions to mitigate these issues, including town halls with senior leaders, talking to employees about the impact that this was having in the business, and helping them to understand how we were pivoting on our business plans to adapt to the situation. Our human resource teams focused on staying in touch with people, appointing department representatives, and providing some administrative support where needed to ensure that our employees working from home were provided with similar levels of support to what they would get in office. Providing employees with data connections and conferencing software and so on was the easy part. The tougher challenges were to establish a real working model, procedures and ways to engage with teams to keep them motivated and productive. Beyond this, each team found the equations that worked for them. We had to give people freedom and flexibility to arrive at solutions that worked in their circumstances, their units, rather than a strict set of rules that everyone in the company had to follow. And I think this extended to every aspect of the business, where previously it was all rules and regs, and it became, you'll just have to flex, and we'll trust our leadership to do the best they can. For example, Jeevit was talking about product design. So similarly, digital product design, whether it was the 3D sampling that Jeevit was talking about, or whether it was other aspects of the design and development, digital prototyping, sampling, that things that we had just not done before to anything like the same extent. Even in our businesses, we had to move very quickly in that direction. To break the monotony, our teams were encouraged to have some fun. This actually happened a little later on, where you realize that this breakdown on connectivity of people was becoming a serious issue. People had moved on from the company. You didn't even know they had gone. People had changed roles and so on. So we got into some sort of things like virtual coffee breaks, online engagement activities and competitions, and compensate for the loss of personal social interaction that they had whilst at work. We've been an organization that's always focused on education. So, we had at a certain point to get back to education and say that we have to get on with the education. So training programs and so on, constant communication, on how to stay safe. All of these things we had to try and pivot to how do you continue the good work that you have been doing, whilst protecting yourself, and your loved ones, and even education on spotting fake and legitimate news sources and just helping people to stay up with the times. There was focus on individual physical, emotional, and mental health, with line managers being educated on new responsibilities that they had to ensure that their teams maintained a healthy work-life balance. I mean, some points you had people saying, we're working from home, we never get a break. It just goes on nonstop. And, there was an education process that went in with that. But whilst all this was going on, our leaders, as with any crisis, had to remain focused on the balance of economic sustainability of the organization, whilst giving top priority to the safety and the protection of our employees whose job roles required them to return to work. There was the workforce that had to get back to the factories and so on. So we had to find those balance. I mean, the pandemic surely brought upon it with it some new challenges that we would never have envisaged in the past. And I believe as a company, and this extends to the industry, that we have reacted to those responsibly and professionally, and that there are learnings, some good, some bad, that will stand us in good stead for the future. And I think it's a good opportunity to really extend a sincere appreciation to all of our employees at our company, MS Holdings, as well as to those across the industry at large, for responding to the call to work, as their contributions and commitment extend beyond our individual businesses for sure, and to the continued prominent positioning of the Sri Lankan apparel industry. And it's also been of national importance at this very challenging time. So it's been a time of new learnings, and there's nothing like a good crisis to help you to think about how you go forward. And I think a lot of those learnings will carry forward, Prashanta.
Thank you, Surendra. That was certainly insightful. We want to move to the next round of questions. I want to focus on the local retail aspects of these businesses. Whilst you represent large apparel manufacturing groups, most on this forum have also ventured into the space of running your own brands. Moose Clothing, Amante, LICC being familiar clothing and retail brands for most Sri Lankans. Could you give a quick snapshot view of the challenges these brands have experienced and how you have addressed them in order to remain operational? I'll start with you, Hasib, on Moose Clothing.
Yeah. So just quickly to this thing,
Hasib, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Right. So say from the beginning, sort of what we tried to do was we tried to keep Moose Clothing Company and Brandix separate. So they are sort of very separate entities to start with, purely because say the requirements of a new brand like Moose and a private label manufacturer like Brandix are very different. So we've kept that separate. Then say we launched Moose in 2018 in Sri Lanka. And so sort of the vision was to have very high quality clothing at very lowest retail prices. That was sort of my vision for the brand. And so we started in 2018. It has come a long way in Sri Lanka. Say to 2020, we managed to win the as a best new entrant for a bronze award in the Slim Brand Excellence. And so I would say in Sri Lanka, it has come a long way. So then when in 2020, early parts of 2020, we launched in India and the Middle East. So and soon as we launched, 2 months later, the pandemic hit. It was sort of absolute disaster. I mean, it was a complete disaster. Then so we had to really relook at our international strategies and all that, how we're gonna relaunch. What we saw was even all other international brands, most of their sales were shifting away from traditional brick and mortar stores to online channels. So when that sort of happens, what we realized was the playing field for new brands versus very established brands sort of becomes level. I mean, it's not completely level because established brands have their brand identity and all that over years, but it becomes a lot more easier for new brands like us to compete. I mean, without overly investing into brick and mortar stores. So with this pandemic, we decided to be a completely a digital brand. So we've evolved our strategy, and say we've relaunched in India, and it's going through complete digital. It's only being sold through digital platforms, and within the next 4 weeks, 6 weeks, we'll be launching in the US and the Middle East as well, again digitally. So it will be again new learnings for us, and we'll be on a journey, because I'm very excited about it, because there'll be a lot of data and a lot of analytics which will come through. So I'm looking forward to this journey.
Fantastic, Hasim. So the pandemic has helped you see an opportunity, obviously, in the online space, and like I said, it's leveled the playing field in terms of having a customer B2C reach. And moving on to Shirendra for Amante.
Yeah, I think our experience, our situation is a little bit different to what Hasib was explaining our brand's been around for 10 or 12 years, and it's predominantly sold in India. It's a lingerie brand, and the Sri Lanka presence is perhaps 15 or 20% of the business. The bulk of the business is in India. And in fact, a few years ago, we actually transitioned the management of the business to India, so it was closer to the market. The interesting thing is that we have a much bigger physical presence, and it has the distribution channels in the two countries tend to work quite differently. In Sri Lanka, the consumers tend to prefer and work more through our exclusive outlets and somewhat through modern retail stores. Whereas in India, it's much more traditional retail focused, in the rural areas and so on. And there is some extent of modern retail departmental stores. But in both countries, the e-com piece was relatively small. In India, it was probably not much more than about 10%. At the onset of the pandemic. In Sri Lanka, it was just a very low single digits. It may also be the category. The category is a category that people probably like to touch and feel a little bit more than certain other categories. So that was why it was. But certainly, obviously, with the pandemic, there was this change happened in both geos. E-com took off in a big way in India. Today, it accounts for about a third of the business, and it's a bigger business now. So that means it's given us a whole lot of other challenges in terms of how do you change the distribution systems, because the distribution systems, the way stocks are managed, and so on, are very, very different between the e-com, traditional retail, modern retail, and exclusive outlets. And even in Sri Lanka, the amount of business that transacts through e-com has increased significantly. It's probably about 10% of the business now, which is a big change. But in Sri Lanka, the consumers seem to still prefer to visit stores and see the products. Beyond that, the product itself has had to shift from fashion to function. I mean, it's very much a fashion product before the pandemic, and we've had to move to functional because people's needs and demands have changed. So that's meant product portfolios have had to be redevised, redesigned, and so on. So it's been a journey of some interest. I think the biggest challenge that probably we had was with the people, because particularly in India, where the brand is very much in rural areas, we've got a large supporting sales team out in the field, and they were probably impacted more by COVID than anything else in the regions they were, and we weren't necessarily as close to hand to help them, because obviously we have our presence we have about 15 exclusive outlets in the cities, but not necessarily in the rural areas. And and then the office-based teams have the work from home challenges and so on. So essentially it was a different bag of interesting challenges. And I think what I would say is, for us, the brand was at a point of its evolution where it was a good time to do a check adjust, and the check adjust was forced upon us. And I think we'll come out of the crisis in a much better position than we actually went into it.
That's positive, and yeah, definitely, it's good to know. Over to you, Arun, on LIC or LIC.
Sure. I think Shirendra and Hasib have covered a lot of the trends that occurred since the pandemic, which has faced a number of brands. LIC, has been around for about 12 years, and we position ourselves as Sri Lanka's leading denim and casual brand. And what's encouraging is we have a very young team managing Lick with a lot of energy. But the past 18 months have had a lot of challenges. So we've had to shift the business model slightly. First of all, we think the potential not only for Lick but for locally grown brands in Sri Lanka is huge, because in 2019, for example, I think there was over $1 billion spent on importing clothing into Sri Lanka.
Mhm.
Now, for a country with such a dynamic apparel industry, that's something which obviously which shouldn't continue going forward. I think we have to find a way to localize this industry wherever possible.
Mhm.
And I think has been mentioned before, coming out of the pandemic, there's been a shift in the demands of our end consumers, and also in our wholesale partners. So we have two parts of our brand with Lick. We have our direct engagement with consumers, which we've worked on increasing through more e-commerce. A lot more. We work with not just in the Western province, but we work with retail outlets, etc., in different parts of the country. And then we have a lot of wholesale partners. And unfortunately, because of lockdowns, their business is very challenging. So there are months or weeks and months that go by where the wholesale partners have almost zero revenue. So we have to be flexible. We need to provide extended payment terms. We have to work in different models. It can't just be an outright purchase model. So we're being more long-term in this business and trying to support our wholesale partners, because when the lockdowns do, we've come in and out of lockdown the last few months, but we do see pent-up demand for our products, for comfortable and functional product. And so we need to be patient, and as the situation stabilizes in Sri Lanka, I think we can expand our market share. And another thing also is that we've doubled down on our ancillary brands for Lick. So we have the licensee for Disney, Marvel, and Star Wars, and this attracts a lot of younger consumers. So we see a lot of demand for these products. We're also the casual wear partner for the Sri Lanka cricket team, and these are the products that consumers want now. It's been mentioned that there's more work from home, there's more flexible working. So we need to provide the products that are appealing to our consumers, and I think our brand is positioned to do that. But we have to be patient. So that's the plan for now.
Thank you. Phenomenal and interesting stat there, Arun. $1 billion of imports of apparel wear. I know we have some government servants and on this webinar today, and I'm sure they'll be taking note of that. And in a country that manufactures apparel for the rest of the world, we should be obviously relying on our local suppliers and designers to provide that. So my summary from what I take away from what I heard today is that we are seeing a shift online. Moose has obviously realized they're going to go completely digital across India. Mante has seen a shift in the consumer's behavior, but they also are expecting a growth to come in. And Arun, as you mentioned, Lick is going to be patient, but understands that there's a pent-up demand, and the consumer tastes have changed to slightly, but through your licensing agreements, you're going to cater to that. So exciting news, gentlemen. Thank you for sharing that. We are moving to our final round of questions, and I just want to do a strategy deep dive on a few areas that might help the audience, especially those from outside the apparel industry. Shrendra, I'm going to start with you. As you know, trade shifts is something that AmCham Sri Lanka is very passionate about. You are the secretary of AmCham Sri Lanka. We have conducted research, reports to document, and even try to capture some of the trade shifts that are taking place in Asia right now. This is where large industries are moving out of countries such as China to other manufacturing destinations in Asia. And these are multi-billion-dollar total investments when you look at the entire supply chain. The trade shifts are due to COVID-19, labor cost changes, inflation, geopolitical alliances, tariffs, and various other related matters. So Shirendra, from a Sri Lankan apparel standpoint, Do you see this as an opportunity or a challenge? And what can we do to win in a post-COVID environment?
Okay, so I don't have the crystal ball, but I'll have a shot at it. I think, Prashanta, we saw the opportunity for trade to shift from the east, perhaps in the direction of Sri Lanka, across all industries, as you know, more in light of some of the geopolitical issues that were happening maybe over the last 3 to 4 years, rather than the pandemic. And I guess we believe that these would have started by now. In our industry, we have not quite seen that happening as yet. What we think may have happened also is that with the pandemics on set, brands that may well have been planning these shifts have deferred their plans because obviously managing more than one crisis at a time, obviously these trade shifts are triggered by situations in their own countries, tariffs going up on Eastern products and so on. And movement as part of a strategy when you've got something like a pandemic is something that's a high risk. So we think that these have probably been delayed because we have not seen this happening so far. It's our expectation that this will probably pick up post the pandemic, or at least once we get back to whatever the new norm is and organizations are more settled, markets are more settled, organizations are more settled. As we've talked about all along, our exports are 5 billion plus or minus. This only accounts for something like 1% of apparel trade globally. It's a very, very small figure. And therefore, if there's any shift of trade, the opportunities have to be significant for us, because a very, very small percentage shift, even decimal points of a percentage shift in our direction, will have a significant impact on the country. So I think the simple answer is, of course, it's an opportunity. The question then is, what are the opportunities that we see? That what are our sales that we can get out there and give to the market to help this trade come in our direction? And we, as through the association, have been doing a lot of work over the last few years to strengthen our position as an ethical sourcing destination. It's been Jeev talked about it very early in the program. I think from a social responsibility point of view, we've been seen for many, many years to be a preferred location. And more recently, the environmental sustainability has big play. We as an industry, we're well known for reliability and quality because that's how we have grown. And with these strategic partnerships that Arun alluded to earlier on, these are big names that we can get out there and say, so and so is in Sri Lanka, how come you're not? To support that, we have even at our shop floor levels, we have a very highly skilled and literate workforce, which makes life much more attractive, particularly in these digital times. Everything is about tech and so on. And more recently, we've become pretty well known as a country for innovation, end-to-end design to delivery solutions, rather than just as pure manufacturers. And of course, on top of that, we always talk about the fact that we're logistically very well positioned on the main shipping routes from east to west. So there's a lot going for the country, which we've been plugging for a while. And I think now is the time to do a little bit more of that. From a national point of view, that we've already connected, and this because we've done a lot of this work through AmCham or in collaboration with AmCham to speak with the relevant government and other authorities to see what they can do to help us to unlock some of the opportunities that or challenges that might be in the way. We have very limited trade advantages compared with other countries, some of our neighboring countries. So that's a big one. We don't have any trade benefits going to the United States, which is, shares, which as a single entity is now our biggest market, because with UK moving out of Europe as an entity probably slips into a sort of second place. 40% of our trade goes in the direction of the US. We have nothing. We do that on the back of no trade advantages. If anything was to come through at any time, that'll make a big difference. Mm-hmm. Of course, within the country, there's policy, the regulations for direct foreign, I think it wouldn't be a bad thing to encourage more direct foreign investment. At this time, it's been a while since we've seen significant growth. we already see the government taking a lot of initiatives on incentives for verticality. Verticality has been the name of the game in our industry. If we want to move forward, COVID, if nothing else, has strengthened that, because obviously having your supply chain close to hand is really important. And thankfully, in our industry, the government is being supportive of this, looking at setting up a dedicated zone and so on and so forth. And so hopefully there'll be better infrastructure support for that. And then, anything else that the government can do, we've been asking in terms of, whether it is energy costs or, leveraging on more sustainable initiatives, support carbon neutral and the like. So I think the efforts towards the government to create the supporting infrastructure or attractiveness to make the industry grow further, along with the effort that the association through the Sri Lanka Apparel Exporters Association and with JAF support we're making to make a bigger sell of the country. I think these are the things that hopefully will make a difference. And if it all goes to plan, maybe 8 billion, which has been a figure on the radar for some time, is a definite possibility. These things could happen quite quickly in the post-COVID era. And, maybe we could put a North Star of even 10 billion out there. So we're encouraged, we're excited, and, hopefully we'll see some of this coming to fruition after the crisis. Sri Lanka's always been resilient, and we've generally come out of crises stronger than most. So we keep our fingers crossed that we'll be able to do this coming out of this crisis and leverage on that opportunity of trade shift when it happens.
And Sharendra, maybe I'll open it up to all the panelists just on that, because there are quite a few questions that are also speaking around this. Is there any limitations from saying a 5 billion to a 7-8 billion industry to becoming a 10 billion? I mean, is there any barriers to that in terms of labor shortages or technical skills, land space? What do you all see from an industry point of view, this not being doubling in size over the next 3 to 5 years?
Maybe we'll ask Arun to perhaps have a shot at that one.
Thanks, Sharendra. I think the 10 billion is a tough ask in the short term. I think obviously last year we had a serious disruption, and we had to have a contraction in our exports because of the pandemic. I think as Sharendra mentioned, I think the figure that the industry is working towards is 8 billion in exports by 2025. And that's also a very, very tough ask. A lot of things have to come into place to achieve that. So these things have been mentioned. So we have to definitely build increase the capacity of local raw materials here in Sri Lanka. And having the dedicated textile zones is going to help. Bringing in some large raw material partners from the Far East and Europe also is going to be very, very important. And we're all working on that. And then also, I think it's been mentioned, our factories are not running at full capacity at the moment. So we have to increase our productivity within our own factories. We have to work with the small and the SME sectors as well in order to leverage their capacity and their workforce and increase the productivity overall, so we can achieve some of this growth. So there's a supply side through the raw materials and productivity growth, and then the demand side. I mean, Sri Lanka we're going to need trade agreements with we have the EU GSP, but we're going to need trade agreements with other geographical areas. We're going to have to be able to take on a non-traditional business that we have not been doing in the past. That will require more flexibility, smaller order quantities. So it's a combination of factors that need to go right to achieve these targets.
Fantastic, Arun. Thank you for sharing that. It's very insightful. We're moving on to Jeevit. Jeevit, we've been talking about the U.S. market, preferential trade not being available. The U.S. market is key for the Sri Lankan apparel industry. Would you be able to elaborate further on this trade relationship and especially its relevance to the apparel industry here?
Yeah, Prashant. So I think Shirendra gave us the numbers a little bit. So 40% of our apparel exports do go to the US currently. So this is obviously a vital relationship that we have to safeguard. But I think the next question we need to look at is how do we grow this while consolidating what we have? And I think the manufacturing side of things, I think we can consolidate on, and the track we're on will help to maintain that. But I do believe we need to look at new business models that to work with the US in order to see exponential growth in this facet as well. And where I see a lot of potential is the hub concept, where we try to position Sri Lanka as a global hub for manufacturing. Now, what do I mean by this? What I mean by this is we try to bring the highly skilled front end design and development jobs that currently reside in Western countries to Sri Lanka. And I see a lot of potential here because Sri Lanka already has the technical know how. We're a country that has invested a lot in innovation, and we're a country that isn't your traditional manufacturer. We don't just cut and sew garments. We are a design to delivery solutions provider, like Shirendra was alluding to. So we take this concept to the next level in the hub concept by positioning Sri Lanka as a global hub for manufacturing and using other manufacturing destinations as our spokes in this wheel as well to keep our business growing. But I think then this needs to also be complemented, right? Because like everyone was saying, we don't have preferential trade agreements with the US. The one we do have is with the EU itself. So how do we realize exponential growth that we saw in the 70s in that front? I think a good case study for this would be Bangladesh. So 70% of Bangladesh's apparel exports actually happen under some kind of preferential trade agreement. We, on the other hand, only have only one destination that we have any kind of preferential trade agreement with. So there definitely needs to be a mindset shift where we start looking at accessing other markets on an even playing field. And the only way this happens is if we look into getting into trade agreements with countries like India, like Japan, like Australia, for example, which our competitors do already have trade agreements with. And I think we have the potential to get there if we open our eyes to the possibilities, and we can structure them in ways that benefit us if we go down that path, Prashant.
Thank you, Jeevit. Bangladesh having 70% of their trade going through preferential. Yeah, so we have some work to do as a chamber. I'm going to switch to Hasib, and there are multiple questions that have come up on our Q&A forum regarding this. So I'm hoping I'll be able to answer that by him giving his view on this. But it's about the supply chain, and Arun touched on it in his answer previously. The raw materials in Sri Lanka obviously are challenging, sourcing out possibly textiles and other raw material inputs for your trade. Is there a room for an opportunity for investment here? And that's the question that we have, and there's been multiple questions on that. Is there an opportunity for it? Is it being taken out? Is it being showcased for big investments to come into Sri Lanka to invest in the supply chain side so that the apparel industry has the ability to scale and grow?
Yeah. So say, Prashant, if we look at, say, 30 years ago, the Sri Lanka apparel industry had only about 25% value addition. Now today, at 5.5, say over $5 billion, there is over 50% value addition today. So over the years, it has come a very long, it has come a long way. So say now going forward, how can we really say, the question is how can we add more value to that? I think say the other panelists also were speaking about it. So I thought Shirendra also alluded to it. One of the things was the government is trying to put a dedicated fabric park in Iravu. So that they're inviting investors. So that is being set up currently as we speak. So say that of course, so that will that's one step. So those sort of investments, the supply chain coming closer to onshore will help add value. But say the notion of being zero is completely, it's not possible, because even if you look at countries like China, so countries like Vietnam, they also import a variety of fabrics, because if fashion keeps changing, there's different demands. So as a result, it's not going to be zero. Then say while say looking at say this, especially the textile industry coming in is a good thing. But there will be certain limitations, because this industry is the textile industry is highly polluting. And so within Sri Lanka, there will be there'll be a limit that, and it's high consumption in energy as well. So there will be a certain limit of how much of these industries that can come in. So say, where I see, so in my opinion, how we can really unlock this value of growth, I think Jeevit alluded to it a little while ago. It's this hub concept. To me, this is because if we look at, we have over 1.5 billion people within this region. Sri Lanka has, or say Sri Lanka, like Jeevit was saying, the others were mentioning, has all the knowledge. Say we have the best technical expertise, say engineering, say in sewing. We have done a lot of automation. So the knowledge hub is there. So now, say the success of this industry is going to be how we will be able to use, say, the population available, say large population available very close to us, very near shore, how we can use that and transfer our knowledge to get manufacturing done there. That way there will be, maybe certain high value production which currently takes place in Europe and countries such as Turkey will move here. Because even right now, the industry in Sri Lanka always has been struggling to recruit apparel workers as well, because people it's been sort of wanting to go up the value chain. People have the desire to more work in the service industries and all that. So for the apparel industry to survive and to get to, like say, to the next level, that's the way forward. I see the hub concept coming in, and for us able to utilizing this over 1.5 billion population which is available in sort of our backyard, and using our knowledge. So I think that sort of, in my opinion, can be the way forward for the apparel industry. And it's sort of happening. I think a lot of us are already in India, Bangladesh and all that. So it's already happening. So it's that probably is the way forward.
Yeah, thanks, Hasib. And adding to what you're saying, having preferential trade engagements with say the larger countries around us will also help bring in some of that supply chain manufacturing to Sri Lanka, because they have preferential trade access to nearly 2 billion people. And I think that's crucial, that as we discuss this, and I know you've all alluded to it, is that once we look at it, that it should be a more integrated solution than just getting a trade to one country or trade barriers there. So thank you for sharing that, Hasib. We are running a little short on time. We have over 26 questions that are coming. So I'm going to jump into maybe 2 or 3 questions from the audience, if you don't mind. I'll share maybe a question, and I'll let the panelists decide on who should answer it. The first one is on logistics, and I know we touched on this briefly before the webinar started. We have 2, one from Chandra Kumar and the second from Mudita, both alluding the same thing. The question goes, with the ever increasing demand and logistic challenges, do you think it's time now for a forum like JAF to take the lead to formalize a strategy to get all its members to work out a collaborative model for key logistic partners to address the import and export logistic challenges? And the second part of that, Mudita's question goes on the same. Vendors and customers are facing this challenge of the pandemic, logistics. What kind of solution do we have or plan to have? Over to the forum.
I'm happy to take a stab at it. I think the reason it's being brought up is because it's kind of flavor of the month at the moment. This hasn't been a big issue for us as an industry by and large. We've had adequate sailings from the east. There have been reasonably economical air freight routes on commercial routes that could be tapped into as and when needed. And whilst it comes at a cost, obviously at a premium cost, by and large, the industry has not had a fundamental problem with incoming raw material logistics up to now. And likewise on the outgoing side for our customers, and most of the industry supplies our customers either on an FOB, on a free carrier or whatever basis. So the freight outgoing is by and large consolidated. Again, this comes back to strategic brands working in Sri Lanka. So they consolidate and send out. Right at the moment in the post, or in the present phase of COVID, this has turned out to be a bigger problem than ever before. We've never seen this issue that we have seen in the last month at the moment. And this is not just for apparel. This will be affecting anyone who has imports from the East. The delays of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and in fact, a lot of unpredictability because of the limited vessel sailings. It's got a compound number of reasons. It's triggered by obviously post-pandemic. There's freight in different parts of the world that has to be moved, and the freight companies have adjusted their schedules to deal with the overall global situation. Maybe it's even related to more lucrative routes for them to put their vessels on. They probably lost a lot of money in the height of the pandemic, and so the economics come into play. And on top of that, there is the COVID situation. Most of the people who are, if anyone's on the call from the apparel industry, know that there's a particular vessel that's on the way from the east that was bringing a lot of freight in for our industry that's been impacted by COVID en route and is now having to do a quarantine at sea. And these things are things we've not had to deal with in the past. On top of that, we're hearing of COVID regulations in other parts of the world that are delaying movement of vessels. I was told just yesterday that there was a significant number of ships berthed outside one of the ports in the US, Los Angeles, if I recall correctly, where they are now imposing a quarantine pre-coming into the port. So these sort of things that are going on at the moment have created a lot of disruption, and it's therefore a subject of the moment. Companies are having to look at solutions at the present time, and they're difficult, because at the end of the day, if your sea freight routes are adequately blocked, that you have to air freight a large amount of product in, the regular air freight routes are not going to be able to cater for them, and this then moves you towards freighters and the like. And in fact, I believe we certainly as a company are in the first stages of discussion of how do we make freighting in through freighters economical. The problem is for any individual company to do that, it is very, very difficult to make that work. If nothing else, you have the whole issue of how does a freighter go back? What does it take back in that same direction? Because by and large, our products are going in the other direction. So I think the question is very valid, that it is a good time for the industry to take a look at something new in this space. Whether this will be a short-term, medium-term issue, or whether this is going to persist, I'm not sure. But I think moving towards consolidation of freight on routes that are more dependable, particularly at this time when our strategic customers expect us to react and support them come what may, I think it's something we're going to have to think about. But it is hot off the press at the moment. My expectation is it's a good area, and it's a good call out that industry association, and it's not just our industry association, it may be a collaboration of industry associations to say, why don't we get some routes going and have some formality of consolidation amongst ourselves. So I think it's a good call out, and it's something we'll have to address.
Thank you, Shurendra. I'm going to go to one last question, and this has come up a few times as well. And the question goes, as key players, are you all concerned about EU Parliament's GSP Plus resolution? What's the private sector's take on it? Over to the panel.
I can try and take that, Prasanta, and then I'd like some of the other panelists to come in. Definitely, that is the GSP Plus has been very critical in terms of the recent growth of the exports. So I would say since in the last 5 years, the majority of the growth to take us to the path of over 5 billion in 2019 has come from growth from EU markets. And I think, as Hasib has mentioned, there's been higher value addition products, more niche products also, and those have been going to EU brands and to the EU market. So the JAF and a few other trade bodies have already engaged with the government, with some of the EU associations, to see how we can work closely to mitigate some of the concerns that have been raised, and really have a collaboration in terms of how we can work openly in solving some of these, so we can continue the positive things that have come from GSP being granted back to Sri Lanka. So it's a very important part of our current strategy and our growth strategy. And as has been mentioned, we need other trade agreements as well to come along with this. So yeah, we have to stay very engaged with this, and to have the necessary support from each stakeholder. So definitely, that's an important thing for us.
Thank you, Arun. Does anyone else want to share on that?
Prashant, I think if I had to add on to what Arun said, I think across the industry, if you take it, we've also been fairly confident that the right measures will be taken for us to retain GSP plus, and that the relevant authorities understand the importance of GSP plus, because we are, like Arun said, we've stayed engaged on this. We've met with the relevant authorities, and they've also reiterated to us that they understand the importance of retaining Sri Lanka's free trade agreements with the EU, and that they are working on it. So I do think that yes, it is cause for concern if we lose it, but let's take a step back, because the authorities are also very aware of that and have given a certain amount of reassurance that they're working on making sure we can retain the agreement we have in place.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that, Jeevit, and it's encouraging to know that you're confident that it won't be an issue. So I'm going to conclude this question by asking Jeevit to share some advice. Jeevit, these are trying times, and the news is constantly negative, from exchange issues, forex issues, HRC, GSP plus, COVID-19, cash flows always on the news, and I'm sure in any business forum. It's hard to be a young corporate leader or a business owner right now. So what snippet of advice could you offer our younger viewers or SME businesses on leading through these tough times?
Look, Prashant, I think it's easy to say that we're inundated with challenges right now, but I don't think it's that different if we take a snapshot in any time of history. The challenges themselves might be different, but the fact that challenges exist has not changed whether we look at the past or whether we look at it right now. In order to deal with these challenges and overcome them, I think it's important that we are always willing to embrace change, and embrace change early. So we need to look for change as an opportunity for growth before, in fact, there is a need for that change to come in place. Now, I think a good example of this is Sri Lanka's use of 3D product development, which I think is here to stay at this point as well, right? It was technology that was underutilized at the time. Nobody knew whether it will be heavily adopted, but it's something that a lot of firms in this country had at least ventured into as a leap of faith at the time. And look, nobody could have predicted the advent of a pandemic, but having gone on that journey, having at least begun that journey, made us better equipped to deal with the challenges that the pandemic brought about, and made us ready to deal with the pandemic, because we had the infrastructure in place and we had started a journey of change that exploded as a result of the pandemic. And finally, I think that for any leader, or I think even any person in general, it's important to acknowledge that you are not the smartest person in a room. You cannot be, because it's impossible for you to actually know everything there has to be known. Now, this is something I know I constantly struggle with, because it's always a fine balance between trying to show and prove yourself versus acting like you know everything, right? But I think the success of leaders depends on having the right people around you to complement the skill set you don't have, and also being able to empower them to successfully showcase their talents and skill sets as well. Now, in order to do this, we go back to my point of being able to acknowledge that, look, I might not be right. And if you can truly go into any meeting, go into any discussion, acknowledging the fact that you could be wrong, then you give everyone around you the opportunity to actually empower everyone around you rather, to come up with their solutions confidently, because they know they're working with someone who's willing to listen to them and willing to acknowledge that he or she or them might be wrong, and will acknowledge what they have to say as well. And I think that is my key takeaway of what can help you to grow and to be successful when it comes to overcoming challenges.
Thank you, Jeevit. And I like that summary, and ending with that. You're right. Every generation had its challenges, and we have to be mindful. The country's been through 3 decades of war at one time. There were tsunamis. There's so many other things. Just look at Sri Lanka per se. So, and it's easy to blame the environment. I think, like you said, we got to put our socks up, look ahead. And with that, we come to the end of this insightful webinar on the apparel sector, and especially meeting 4 pandemic resilient companies. The advice and insight shared will definitely help us as a nation, industry, and even single businesses to focus on making a better tomorrow and stronger tomorrow. Thank you for joining us tonight. Good night and God bless you. Over to you, Rai, to do the formal closure.
Thank you, Prasanta. Well, that's all we have time for this evening. It's been our privilege to bring you this inspiring and enlightening session, which we hope will do exactly what this series sets out to do, which is to inspire you. If we missed your questions, because there were so many of them, we do apologize. We tried to curate and club as many of the questions as possible together. And I do believe that we were able to touch on most, if not all, of the related issues that were raised. On behalf of our panelists, the AmCham Sri Lanka and the AmCham Sri Lanka team, our usual reminder, of course, as we go, to keep your physical distance, masks on, hand sanitized, immunity boosted, fingers crossed and spirits up. Stay safe, everyone. Good night and God bless.